The subject of today's video is now a discredited science, but one that shaped the 19th and 20th centuries. With seemingly noble goals of improving a country's population, it soon revealed to be a genocidal ideology. It served as the underpinning for forced sterilization, banning interracial marriages, and the mass murder of disabled people. In today's video, we will look at the founding principles of eugenics, how it was first adopted by some countries, and its most infamous crimes. It is perhaps helpful to start with a definition of eugenics. It is the study and application of how to best arrange human reproduction within a population with the use of heritable traits. Very often, the focus is on how positive traits are increased and how negative traits are removed. There can often be a conflation between an individual's choice of sexual partner or sexual selection and eugenics. But it should be made clear from the start that eugenics has higher goals than merely individuals. It is rather the attempt to improve a nation's gene pool by encouraging those considered desirable to breed, and preventing those deemed to be defective from breeding. This confusion as to definition is not too surprising. Eugenics was born following Charles Darwin's work on natural selection. The concept of hereditary traits and genes was not fully understood, but it was understood that hereditary was real. The father of eugenics was Francis Galton, a cousin to Darwin, and he was inspired by Darwin's work. Whilst somewhat of a polymath, Galton was largely a statistician who researched whether eminent individuals produced eminent children. He gathered data, measurements, and his own subjective opinions on, for example, a woman's beauty, hoping to uncover a connection. He looked to whether men considered eminent in a given field, such as statesmen, artists, or scientists, and looked whether they were related to other such people when compared to the general population. He asserted that the laws of inheritance applied to humans just as they did to other animals. But whilst natural selection was a slow and gradual change, Galton suggested a quicker solution. His research found that positive traits were diluted and would settle into an average norm over time, meaning there would be less eminent people. Galton attributed this in large part due to what he considered the least capable of society reproducing too rapidly. Galton concluded that talent and intelligence, criminality and mental illness were hereditary, but that eventually those with talent would fade, resulting in the collapse of Western society. The impact of environment was not considered. For Galton, it was enough that a correlation could be seen in his data. Galton's solution was that those with desirable traits, whether it be intelligence or prowess as a wrestler, ought to only breed with one another. What's more, he believed that governments should encourage such breeding with monetary incentives. What Galton put forward is known as positive eugenics. The existence of positive traits implies that there are negative human traits too. Galton believed that rather than these being encouraged, they ought to be eliminated. As we come to see, this ultimately led to genocidal and murderous acts. Once Gregor Medel's work on genes being a vehicle for hereditary was accepted, eugenics was widely adopted. It did not take long for eugenics to be regarded as the next step in human progress. It was thought that eugenics would be able to rid a country of problems such as criminality, mental disorders, and disability, all seen as hereditary. But it all came alongside with categorization for those with mental illness or learning disabilities. Words such as idiot, imbecile, and moron were used to describe the levels of intelligence, and such labels were used to determine the worth of a person to society. One notable example is the condition of feeble-mindedness, a catch-all term used to describe all manner of behaviours. It was used to cover what we would now identify as learning disabilities, promiscuity, criminal behaviours, or just any other behaviours that were deemed antisocial. The dangers of such a wide term, when combined with the eugenics ideology, can perhaps be tragically seen in the case of Buck versus Bell. When Carrie Buck was a child, she was taken from her mother, Emma Buck, who was detained in the Virginia State Colony for epileptics and the feeble-minded. She was sent to live with a foster family, and by all accounts had a normal childhood. However, she was withdrawn from school in the 6th grade and made to become a domestic servant for the family. When she was 17, she was essayed by a nephew of the family becoming pregnant. The foster family applied to the courts and had her mother committed to the colony, right before the very same judge who had committed her mother. Carrie's daughter Vivian was taken and raised by the foster family. Carrie was detained, but the superintendent of the colony, John Bell, wanted to use Carrie as a test case. With 2 generations detained for feeble-mindedness, and with a 6-month-old infant apparently showing signs, he applied to have Carrie forcibly sterilized. Virginia law, underpinned by eugenic principles, allowed for sterilization for those considered to be feeble-minded. But it wasn't clear whether the law could be considered constitutional. The case reached the Supreme Court, where the majority verdict was in favor of forcibly sterilizing Caroline on account of her supposed feeble-mindedness. Writing for the majority, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes stated, quote, "Carrie Buck is a probable potential patient of socially inadequate offspring, likewise afflicted. Her welfare and that of society will be promoted by her sterilization." And perhaps most disturbing, the judge went on to say, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. This precedent set by the case paved the way for more than 8,000 Virginians to be forcibly sterilized by the state, with the law remaining and used until the early 1970s. Virginia was not alone in passing forced sterilization laws based on eugenic principles. 2/3 of American states passed such laws. These laws initially targeted those in prisons or asylums, people already detained by the state. But as the case of Carrie Buck demonstrates, the reach was expanded in the name of eugenics. An estimated 64,000 Americans were sterilized. Almost 2/3 of those sterilized were women, with Black and Native American women disproportionately affected. Eugenics was a key aspect of scientific racism. This was the notion that white people were genetically superior to other races. This can perhaps best be seen with the anti-miscegenation laws. These laws prevented interracial marriage. Such laws were underpinned by the eugenic belief that breeding with inferior races would pollute and devalue the white genetic stock. The use of sterilization laws was pushed by a number of eugenic organizations. International committees attracted eugenicists from all around the world, sharing their ideas and data. The first International Eugenics Congress of 1912 was held in London, and was attended by the likes of former British Prime Minister Arthur Balfour and future Prime Minister Winston Churchill. It attracted people from the United States, France, Germany, and Italy. Talks included the importance of racial hygiene and the role of race in history, highlighting the importance of race for eugenicists. One of those attending the first Congress was Charles Davenport, founder of the American Eugenics Record Office. The Eugenics Record Office and its publication Eugenical News' primary goal was to popularize and promote eugenics among the American population. The organization was founded in 1910. It focused on forced sterilization of Americans deemed a genetic threat. It also pushed to limit immigration of the unfit into the United States. Harry Laughlin, director of the Records Office, was appointed by the United States Congress to provide guidance and eugenic advice on the immigration restriction of 1924. It capped immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe, and all but ended immigration from East Asia and India. Margaret Sanger, seen as the founder of Planned Parenthood, was a firm believer in eugenics. Her beliefs in the right for reproductive freedoms were merged with her white supremacy, noted for giving speeches to the KKK in the 1920s. But it was the National Socialists who brought eugenics to its natural conclusion. In Hitler's manifesto Mein Kampf, he ranted about the need to prevent, quote, defective people from procreating. Hitler was very well aware of the American eugenic laws. In Mein Kampf, he stated his admiration for the steps taken by the US to limit immigration from lesser nations. Early on into their rule, laws were passed preventing those with certain disabilities or conditions from reproducing. The Nuremberg laws not only governed racial laws on defining Jews, but also for the forcible sterilization of 400,000 people. Marriage between Germans and those considered to be that of less genetic stock were banned in 1935. These laws were directly modelled on those from California. Eugenicists such as Ottmar Freiherr von Verscheuer played a major role in shaping and reinforcing National Socialist racial ideology. He was the director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute from 1942. He received results from the twisted experiments in the concentration camps. He had previously overseen research into 2 twin studies. Twin studies were first suggested by Galton, where scientists would compare results between 2 genetically identical subjects. The infamous Dr. Josef Mengele of Auschwitz was mentored by Ottmar during his thesis, and Mengele's own twisted experiments on twins is the stuff of nightmares. Mengele would use one of the twins as the control, whilst the other was experimented upon. Amputations, exposure to disease, and even forced insemination were all carried out, and Mengele would even experiment on children. When the twin died, the survivor was often murdered too, so a comparative autopsy could be carried out. But perhaps the most infamous example of eugenics in action was the Action T4 program, organized in National Socialist Germany. The regime sought to remove from the gene pool and the country hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children. This program was started following the intervention of Hitler's personal doctor in a euthanasia case of a disabled infant by the name of Gerhard Kretschmer. His parents petitioned the Führer to euthanize their child, with Hitler's personal doctor carrying out the deed. Shortly after, doctors and nurses were required to document all children born with hereditary illnesses or disability. Medical centres were transformed into killing centres, where families had their loved ones taken away to be secretly murdered. Those with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and physical disabilities were all targets, under the guise of specialised care facilities. The regime took away people of all ages. In 6 selected facilities, they experimented in efficient ways to murder some of the most vulnerable people in society, often using gas to do so. Such experiments paved the way for the gas chambers of the death camps of the Holocaust. Between January and August of 1940, some 70,000 people were murdered in what is often termed involuntary euthanasia. The program was halted following public outcry, but was restarted in 1942, not ceasing until the end of the Second World War. A further 200,000 people were murdered during this time. Many were left to starve, given overdoses, or worked to death. Eugenic principles and ideology played a major role in the T4 program. The regime produced propaganda showing the drain on the state that the care for a disabled person would cost, stating that the money could be better spent on healthy Aryans. The regime also used positive eugenics, as can be seen in the awarding of the Mother's Crosses for women who gave birth to multiple children. The National Socialists pushed the idea that both men and women were fighting not only a genocidal war over the lesser races, but a war to repopulate the world with the superior German and Aryan races, with both deserving of medals in their respective fights. At the end of World War II, eugenics fell out of favour. The crimes of National Socialist Germany have been argued by some to be a logical conclusion for eugenics. In the face of this, many eugenicists abandoned their ideology. Planned Parenthood now completely distances themselves from Sanger's eugenic principles. However, many eugenicists did not abandon their ideology. Rather, they reframed, renamed, and remarketed their goals. The term crypto-eugenics was first used in a 1957 memo within the British Eugenics Society, where it set out pursuing eugenic ends by less obvious means. This has fueled theories that shadowy cabals continue their eugenics programs. Some, however, remained more open, such as in post-war Japan. The Eugenic Protection Law of 1948 allowed for the involuntary sterilization of people with hereditary diseases and non-hereditary mental illness. Rather than getting consent from the patient, consent for the procedure was obtained from a Eugenic Protection Council. During the 1950s, as many as 1,000 people a year were sterilized under this law. The story of eugenics is one that could be seen as the noble goal of improving the well-being of society through immoral means. It is a story of how scientific advancement can be polluted by abhorrent ideology, how science can be co-opted and used to justify some of the most darkest policies targeting the most vulnerable people, and how science can be the basis for racism, genocide, and murder. In the drive for improvement, it is a story that is not over yet, with the emergence of precision gene editing and doubtless future advances. History can offer not a precedent to be followed, but a warning, or a reminder of the importance of proceeding with caution and the impact on victims of one of the more disturbing ideologies in human history.